How's it going? My name is Max, and this is the Republic of Philosophy. And today I'm going to be reading The Republic. And this is the Penguin Classic Edition, and it is translated by Desmond Lee. This is a sort of an old version. I've done a lot of reading in this, but I want to go through it detailed. And yeah, so the plan is for me to read a section every so often and upload it to YouTube. So people like yourself can read along. And if you've got any comments, any analysis, anything really, feel free to leave it in the comment section. And I'm also currently reading Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Aristotle's Metaphysics, and Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. So keep an eye out for them. Okay, the prelude, part 1, introduction. This is page 3, just after the contents and all of the introduction, skipping the introduction. Part 1, introduction, the prelude. The scene set and the characters introduced. The subject of the dialogue, justice or right conduct, is introduced in a preliminary discussion with Cephalus, who, in effect, describes it as telling the truth and paying one's debts. Book 1, 327a. I went down yesterday to the Piraeus with Glaucon, son of Aristoton. I wanted to say a prayer to the goddess, and also to see what they would make of the festival, as this was the first time they were holding it. I must say that I thought that the local contribution to the procession was splendid, though the Thrasymachon contingent seemed to show up just as well. We had said our prayers and seen the show and were on our way back to town when Polemarchus, the son of Cephalus, noticed us in the distance making our way home and sent his slave running on ahead to tell us to wait for him. The slave caught hold of my coat from behind and said, "Polemarchus says you are to wait." I turned and asked where his master was. "He's coming along behind you," he said. "Do wait." "We will," said Glaucon. And soon afterwards Polemarchus came up, and with him were Adimantus, Glaucon's brother, Niceratus, son of Nicias, and others who had all apparently been to the procession. "Socrates," said Polemarchus, "I believe you are starting off on your way back to town." "You're quite right," I replied. "Do you see how many of us there are?" he said. "I do." "Well, you will either have to get the better of us or stay here." "Oh, but there's another alternative," said I. "We might persuade you that you ought to let us go." "You can't persuade people who won't listen," he replied. "No," said Glaucon, "you certainly can't." "Well, you can assume we shan't listen. And don't you know," added Adimantus, "that there is going to be a torch race in the evening on horseback in honor of the goddess?" "On horseback?" said I. "That's a novelty." "Do you mean a relay race in which they carry torches on horseback and hand them to each other?" "Yes," answered Polemarchus. "And there's to be an all-night carnival as well, which will be worth seeing. We will go out after dinner to watch it. We shall meet a lot of young men there to talk to. So please, do stay." To which Glaucon replied, "It looks as if we shall have to." "Well, if you think so," I said, "stay we must." So we went to Polemarchus's house, where we found his brothers Lysias and Euthydemus, and besides them Thrasymachus of Calithathon, Charmandides of Panea, and Clyphathon, son of Aristodemus. Polemarchus's father, Cephalus, was there too. A very old man he seemed to me. For it was a long time since I had seen him last. He was sitting garlanded on some sort of easy chair, as he had just been sacrificing in the courtyard. There were some chairs standing around about, so we sat down beside him. As soon as he saw me, Cephalus welcomed me and said, "You don't come down to the Piraeus to see us, Socrates, as often as you should. If I were still strong enough to make the journey to town easily, there would be no reason for you to come here. I would visit you. As it is, you ought to come here more frequently, For I myself find that as age blunts one's enjoyment of physical pleasures, one's desire for rational conversation and one's enjoyment of it increases correspondingly. So don't refuse me, but come and talk to the young men here and visit us as if we were old friends. As a matter of fact, Cephalus, I said, I enjoy talking to very old men, for they have gone before us, as it were, on a road that we too may have to tread. And it seems to me that we should find out from them what it is like and whether it is rough and difficult or broad and easy. You are now at an age when you are, as the poets say, about to cross a threshold. And I would like to find out how it strikes you and what you have to tell us. It is a difficult time in life, or not? Certainly tell you how it strikes me, Socrates, he said. For some of us old men often meet together like the proverbial birds of a feather. And when we do meet, most of them are full of woes. They hanker for the pleasures of their youth, remembering how they used to make love and drink and go to parties and the like, and thinking it a great deprivation that they can't do any more. Life was good then, they think, whereas now they can hardly be said to live at all. And some of them grumble that their families show no respect for their age and proceed to harp on their miseries old age brings. But in my opinion, Socrates, they're putting the blame in the wrong place. For if old age were to blame, my experience would be the same as theirs, and so would that of all older men. But in fact, I have met many whose feelings are quite different. For example, I was once present when someone was asking the poet Sophocles about sex and whether he was still able to make love to a woman. To which he replied, "Don't talk to me about that. I'm glad to have left it behind me, escape from the fierce and frenzied master." A good reply, I thought then, and still do. For in old age you become quite free of feeling and this sort, and they leave you in peace. And when your desires lose their intensity and relax, you get what Sophocles was talking about, a release from a mad master. In all this, and in the lack of respect their families show them, there is only one thing to blame, and that is not their old age, Socrates, but their character. For if men are sensible and good-tempered, old age is easy enough to bear. If not, youth, as well as age, is a burden. I was delighted by what he said and tried to lead him on to say more by replying, "I'm afraid that most people don't agree with what you say, Caiaphas, but think that you carry your years lightly, not because of your character, but because of your wealth. For they say that the rich have many constellations." Of course, they don't agree with me, he said. And there's something in what they say, though, not as much as what they think. The story about Themistocles is very much to the point. A Serphian was abusing him and saying that his reputation was due not to his personal merits, but to his being an Athenian. And Themistocles answered, "I certainly should not have been famous if I had been a Serphian, but nor would you if you had been an Athenian." The same remark applies to those who are not rich and find old age a burden. A good man may not find old age easy to bear if he is poor, but a bad man won't be at peace with himself, even if he is rich. Even if he is rich. Did you inherit most of your fortune, I asked Caiaphas, or did you make it yourself? Did I make my fortune, Socrates? He said. As a businessman, I rank somewhere between my grandfather and my father. For my grandfather, after whom I am named, inherited about as much as I now have, and multiplied it several times over, while my father, Lysanias, reduced it to less than what it is now. For myself, I shall be pleased enough if I leave these boys of mine a little more than I inherited. The reason why I asked, I said, was that you do not seem to me, overly fond of money. And this is the way in general with those who have not made it themselves, while those who have are twice as fond of it as anyone else. For just as poets, we are fond of our own poems, and fathers of their own children, so money makers become devoted to money, not only because, like other people, they find it useful, but because it's their own creation. So they are tiresome company, as they have a good word for nothing but money. That's true, he said. It is indeed, said I. But I have another question. What do you think is the greatest advantage you have gained from being so rich? One, he replied, which many will perhaps not credit. For you know, Socrates, when a man faces the thought of death, there come into his mind anxieties that did not trouble him before. The stories about another world, about punishment in a future life for wrongs done in this, and which he once used to laugh, begin to torment his mind with the fear that they may be true, and either because of the weakness of old age or because as he approaches the other world, he has some clearer perception of it. He is filled with doubts and fears and begins to reckon up and see if there is anyone he has wronged. The man who finds that in the course of his life he has done a lot of wrong often wakes up in the night in terror, like a child with a nightmare, and his life is full of foreboding. But the man who is conscious of no wrongdoing is filled with cheerfulness and hope, the comfort of old age, as Pindar calls it. For I love the passage where he says of man who has lived a just and God-fearing life, sweet hope, who guides men's wandering purpose, treads at his side, gladdens his heart, and comforts his old age. Wonderful lines. Now, it is chiefly for this that I think wealth is valuable, not perhaps to everyone, but to good and sensible men. For wealth contributes very greatly to one's ability to avoid both unintentional cheating or lying, and the fear that one has left some sacrifice to God unmade, or some debt to man unpaid before one dies. Money has many other uses, but taking one thing with another, I reckon that for a reasonable man, this is by no means its last. That's far enough, Cephalus, I said. But are we really to say that doing right consists simply and solely in truthfulness and returning anything we have borrowed? Are those not actions that can be sometimes right and sometimes wrong, for instance? If one borrowed a weapon from a friend who subsequently went out of his mind and then asked for it back, surely it would be generally agreed that one ought not to return it, and that it would not be right to do so, nor to consent to tell the strict truth to a madman. That is true, he responded. Well then, I said, telling the truth and returning what we have borrowed is not the definition of doing right. Oh yes, it is, said Polemarchus, interrupting. At any rate, if we are to believe Simonides, well, said Cephalus, I bequeath the argument, the two of you, for I must go and see about the sacrifice. Will I take over from you, said Polemarchus. You do, said Cephalus with a smile, and left for his sacrifice. So that's section 1. Next time I will read section 2, the conventional view of justice developed. And feel free to leave a comment and let me know what you think. It'd be interesting to see if anybody has an analysis of that section. See you later.